Yeah, ready?
Yeah.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Okay.
I took the bait.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Society of Shady Characters. Today, we're going to be talking about struggles in college and just kind of our experiences with that. And yeah, so to kick us off, do we
Nice.
want to open? Yeah, open with a prayer, John.
Sure, go ahead.
In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the
Amen.
Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
All right. So, college life.
Yeah,
Which,
still living it, fifth year senior.
yeah, I don't know why you ever signed up for that.
Uh,
But you said you had some questions you wanted to start with.
oh, oh, we're just kicking it off right then and there. So John, as someone who got married while in college, or right after, what were kind of the struggles in preparing for marriage that you encountered, and how did you kind of deal with that?
Some of the struggles. Well, so I'd say that our church at the time had a good priest who was able to help us kind of navigate that realm of preparing for marriage. So, um, Father Gregory was very adamant that we signed up for online classes to. Uh, well, there were two, and so I think that we got a lot of backlash at first from not necessarily from my side of the family, but her side definitely had a couple of um, not issues, but just like, oh, why do you guys have to do classes and all that? Like, I didn't have to do classes to get married, and so it was just a weird thing where it was like, why do you have to do that and whatever. We're it was whatever. But anyway, one of the classes was on kind of just the faith and our relationship, and it kind of just promoted us having conversations about our faith and our relationship. It kind of walked from Genesis and some of the teachings of how God created Adam and Eve and how men and women were created and the responsibilities that are laid out in Genesis and how that translates with the New Testament and with Christ's teaching. And so it just got us talking. And so that we would do that like once a week or once every other week online. And then the second class was more just on like natural family planning and stuff, just general education on that. And so I think for us, it was hard in one aspect that it was one more thing to do, but it was also nice that it was more disciplined and more laid out, and there were guided lessons for us to do. So I think it was nice because it just forced us to take the time to actually talk about those things. And honestly, I'd say that's probably the biggest. That was the biggest piece of preparing for our marriage was just talking about stuff, and that was a very fruitful exercise for us because they'd ask questions that be based around some reading. We'd read a paragraph or two, and then they'd ask us a question. We'd type out a response, and some of them were just like here's a block to write your thoughts down on. But then sometimes it would split it into my response and her response, so you kind of get that dual answer, and then you send off your responses to the sponsors that were kind of helping. They would read through your answer key and your responses, and they'd write out these very nice and thoughtful, uh, full responses and feedback for our answers or things that we were thinking about. And so, yeah, I'd say that was kind of the bulk of it. I wouldn't say it was a hard thing to do, but it was nice that it was something that we had to do because it wasn't. It's not to say that we wouldn't talk about faith or wouldn't talk about our upcoming marriage individually, or sorry, on our own free will, but it definitely having the say requirement to do so forced us to carve some more time out for it, and I thought that that was a fruitful exercise. Um,
So,
th-
um, just like kind of following up on that, like how did you deal with some of the criticisms of like close relatives?
well, I mean, like I said, it wasn't really that big a deal. It was more just like, why do you guys have to? That you should be able to just get married or whatever. And we were like, look, like we are planning to get married and stay married for the rest of our lives, and part of the part of the process of doing that is making sure that you are on the same page with things, and that you don't surprise each other with things that you withheld before getting married and finding out about that later. And so for us, we just kind of shrugged it off because it was like, look, I mean, we're trying to make something that lasts for a long time, and so you have to take the time to, cross your T's and dot your I's. So it was whatever. We were happy to continue doing it anyway. But marriage is not always something that has to come straight out of college. So maybe we can reflect on some of the stuff that maybe we had uh, shared challenges, or maybe not. But coming into college, what were some of your initial thoughts on like, being in the new environment and not having like the parish you were used to going to growing up, and having this new community and being new to everybody there, and whatnot? Did you have any concerns or any problems that you dealt with, you felt like, with getting integrated into that community?
Yeah, sure, I can talk about that. I guess for me, it was not hard to connect with Father Foley,
Mm-hmm.
because I think Father Foley did a really good job of just kind of being available and welcoming. One of the things I definitely struggled with was not integration, because I think the Catholic community that we got to be a part of was great, but the problem for me was you're in college, you get to experience freedom for the first time. Like, no one's
Mm-hmm.
making you go to church, no one's telling you what to do, no one's waking you up in the morning saying, "Hey, like we're going to mass. Are you coming with?"
Yeah.
It's all on your own, and that was something that I definitely struggled with, because it was like, okay, like it's COVID year, and like there isn't there isn't much like community happening at mass. I have to get up and I have to like make the effort, and like I'm tired. Like school's been super busy recently. I was just like sick for the first month of school. And so yeah, I would say for me it was a lot of the freedom problem. There were other
Yeah.
demands on me. I would say I was not like the people I lived with were not super religious. So
Mm-hmm.
that also adds something when you
Yeah.
don't have a support system around you right away of people just being Catholic. Like there are so many different groups of people, especially when you don't go to a Catholic college, who are non-denominational, who might be Protestant, who might disagree with you, who might not even believe in religion. So you're for the first time you're really experiencing just a full variety of people that you're not used to living with, who have different perspectives than you and might not be super supportive of what you believe.
Yeah. I definitely can relate to. There was something you mentioned with just kind of not having somebody there to pull you along. Because I remember the first few weekends that we were in college, they had. I mean, obviously it was during COVID. They had those online masses
Mm-hmm.
over Teams or whatever, and I just remember being like, man, I'm not going to mass online. Like, I'm either going in person or not.
Yeah,
And so it was definitely harder to just build up the community or to become a part of it at first, just because I was like, look, I mean, if we're not getting together for the mass, then I'm not, you know, it's not the same.
it is. It is not the same. Like online mass to me has never been appealing.
No, no, and I understand like if you're sick or if you're homebound or something, like sure, not knocking it, but for me, when that was just the only option that they had for us, I was like, we have this massive auditorium that you're already holding mass in. Just let us spread out, or but yeah, it's never going to be the same. And so I can relate to portions of what you said. Do you think that there was what was the thing that finally got you to get over that hump, that challenge of like you said you didn't have any roommates who were like, oh, let's go to mass together or whatever. You had to kind of get yourself there at some point. How did you navigate that and get past that?
Yeah, so honestly, I I didn't do it on my own. I had I met like a junior who was in our like living area because our living situation at college was very different, and he literally just like pulled me. He was like, "Hey, like I know you're Catholic, you know you're Catholic. Like let's just go to daily mass. Like it's literally 30 minutes. We'll go grab dinner afterwards. It's gonna be super easy. Like, come on, let's just go. Let's just go." And I was like, you know what? Like, okay, like I love Father Foley. Um, like, why not? Like, sure.
Was it Jacob?
Yeah, Jacob Mulcahy.
Yeah.
He was just like, you know what? Let's just go. Like, come on,
Mm-hmm.
you need to go. I was like, yeah, like I need to go. And so yeah, that was super helpful. It was just like having a person kind of be there for you when you have like fallen out of faith is always super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Because like sometimes you can't do it on your own, and sometimes you can't be like, yes, I'm gonna go. Because obviously, like if you just decide to be like, well, I have school, like I'm away from home, I have to call my parents, I have to like conform to like fit in and like make friends, like I have to then go do stuff with my new friends, I have like to take care of myself. Oh, I want to watch this movie this weekend. Oh, I just want to relax. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are just so many mounting things on you, and for me, that's what happened. And then Jacob was just like, Ryan, let's go. Let's go to mass. It's 30 minutes. Super easy. We'll go grab dinner at the dining hall right after. It's like right over there. And I was like, okay, like cool. So that's what we did.
Okay.
And I would say that was super super helpful.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's always easier when somebody asks first.
Yeah. So what for you then? After like online mass kind of stopped and we kind of got back in the community kind of got back in the groove of hosting mass on Sunday. Was that all it took for you? And if so, then after that, how did you kind of introduce yourself to the community and kind of form a social circle?
Yeah, so I would say I was fortunate in this aspect. When I was in high school, I'd grown up going to mass with my family, and my mom was very, let's say, disciplined and responsible, and she went to mass well, it would be Saturday night for them. But so I grew up with her being kind of a constant with that. But then when I was in high school, I had joined the choir at my school for mass, and so that had been kind of a fun thing to do with friends. I was friends with everybody in the choir there, so I was like, why not? And so while I was doing choir for my high school, a couple of people were like, hey, I think you should come sing with us at this other parish, at the Latin Mass parish. They're like, I think you would really enjoy being in the choir there. So I was like, okay, sure. So I went and tried it out, and I fell in love with being in the choir there. And so for the last just about 2 years of my high school experience, I was taking myself over to this different parish that was not the one that I was used to, and not was it, my parents weren't going to that one. My parents were still going to the one that I'd grown up going to with them. And so in that sense, I was very fortunate and blessed to kind of I was already exposed to taking myself to church and to being responsible for getting myself to church and not just going with family. Um, and it helped obviously because I was friends with all these people in the choir, and so I wanted to be there, and obviously I wanted to go to mass by that point, but it helped. And so I was fortunate that I had built up some of those habits before we showed up to college. And so yeah, when when the virtual masses finally died out and we could attend in person, it did not take twisting my arm to go, which was I was fortunate for again. But I'd say for me, the part that helped me get integrated into the community, because I'm not always the most outgoing for making new friendships and whatnot, but was that I had that they had the choir there, and so they had the announcement one Sunday, like, "Hey, we're gonna be opening up the gates to people who want to join choir, and if you want, you can try out for our scola. That one you do need to try out for, but the other one you can just be a part of. You don't need to try out for the choir. You can just join." And so I showed up to the first rehearsal for that, and just kind of mostly kept to myself, but you get put into your little vocal parts and whatnot, and so I integrated into a group of guys who they always were pretty funny. They knew how to crack jokes that got everyone laughing, and so it was a fun environment. And I tried out for the Scola, and I got into the Scola, and so I got to spend more time with these people, and so I made really close friends in the choir. And what I learned with the people in the choir, especially at that time, was that the people who were willing to volunteer to do choir and to take on the extra hour or two of practice. I mean, it wasn't a huge obligation, but they were the ones who were also willing to step up and volunteer for community events and to help out with retreats and to set up those like spire nights that we had, just to be a part of the community. And so they would always, hey, you should come help us, set up for the retreat or whatever. And I'd be like, okay, sure. And so that was definitely my stepping stone for getting involved in the community, was just becoming a part of the choir. For me was probably that first stepping stone. And it's something that I've carried on after college now. Is like I started going to church at this parish in town, and they have a beautiful choir. And so I was like, oh, I should, maybe I hadn't been doing choir for a couple of years by now. And so I was like, let me ask about it. And so I went up to the choir director and introduced myself, and it's like, hey, I've had a history of singing in choir for a good while now, and I'm interested in joining your choir. And she was like, oh, absolutely. And so I've been able to see that it's like not just a one time, like, oh, it just worked at college. Like it's been helpful in high school, in college, and afterward, just doing something with the community. It doesn't have to be choir, but doing something with a group of people who have shared interest, that helped a lot, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did really well after we got introduced to each other towards the end of freshman year was we were able to like build a community, like a support community, just a
Mm-hmm.
group of friends that were willing to do like things together, and then also on top of that make mass part of the weekly schedule.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think things were definitely easier to carry on once you get to know people and once you have friends that are there. Then, like I said, there becomes a slightly social aspect of it. So you don't, you could still be going to mass because you want to go to mass and because you ought to be. But once you have friends there, it's definitely easier. Um,
Hmm.
it's easier, and like you said, then you have the group responsibility, like the shared responsibility of, okay, we're all going to mass together. We're all going to hang out. And like we in our case, we started out like, oh, this whole group of us really likes hanging out. Let's go to brunch after mass every Sunday, or let's meet up on Fridays and Saturdays and play board games and stuff like that, or
Hmm.
just like go out together. And so like you kind of get this shared responsibility of like, we make sure that we check on each other and make sure everybody is going to mass still. And so that helps for sure.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think about a lot, or just in preparation for this, is how like the Catholic community changes over time. Because
Mm-hmm.
I would say it got pretty different. Because I mean, you see focus missionaries coming and going. over time. Like people start to adopt different responsibilities. Like people get busy with other things. They take up different hobbies and different interests. Like we had a priest change during our time in college, just
Mm-hmm.
like all of those things and different visions. Uh, and I noticed, and I have like other friends who used to be Catholic and are no longer Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And like they would fall in with other faith groups like Protestants, mainly Protestants. And I was always just like, I wonder why that is. Like, I wonder why that is. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, that was never an option. I just never like thought of it that way. But I would also say that my upbringing as a Catholic was a very like positive experience. And I know like not
Mm-hmm.
everyone has positive experiences. Um, so yeah, I just found that interesting, like how different like people move from communities and don't really focus on like changes or don't like they transition from communities and they also change faith because of it because they're moving
Mm-hmm.
into a community where they feel more welcomed or where they have just positive experiences with, and I found that interesting.
Yeah, no, I definitely noticed the same change as you over the 4 years. That I think part of it was out of like the community was strong and active freshman year. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. I think part of that was slightly out of necessity because people weren't going out so much. People weren't going to mass off campus so often because we were we had to stay on the campus for COVID restriction reasons, and so part of it was just born out of like people were around more, and so they participated more just because that's what they had to be here and not wherever they wanted to be. I think also there was definitely a larger presence of good, strong community personalities that, like you mentioned, either they were missionaries and they came and went, or they were like the priest can definitely have a big impact on that. And I noticed also just with the student body, with class, with certain people graduating out of the university and some people coming in, then you definitely get these shifts and these changes that if not properly like what would we say, because you don't want to box in a specific community and just make it the same all the time, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so but it has to be cared for and has to be adapted. And I noticed so like freshman year, sophomore year, especially both of those, there was a very strong here. Let's keep it to just very specific Catholic community stuff. There was a strong retreat focus, and people were willing, I would say, very willing to work retreats, to organize retreats, to make them fun and engaging, and people by and large enjoyed going on said retreats. But I remember our junior year, this would be after a couple of classes have graduated, and we've had a couple of focus missionary changes, and then we had our priest change, and all of a sudden a couple of these like so beginning of the year they have the freshman retreat just to try to get people involved in the community to start out, and that all of a sudden they had a harder time getting people to volunteer for it, and they also had a harder time getting people to go to the retreat. It took not that it like they were going around like, oh, you should come. It was wasn't like they were twisting people's arms to come, but it just the attendance rate wasn't quite the same,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like okay, freshman classes, some people sometimes there's bigger numbers, sometimes there's not. It's not necessarily indicative of anything specific. But then I think one of the bigger ones was having the tech retreat that you and I had both attended and worked on separate occasions, and you and I think both had felt some kind of connection to that specific retreat, and I think a lot of people did because it tended to be one that people thoroughly enjoyed and felt was a good use of, because I mean, like you said, we have all these million things going on, and so to go on a retreat over the weekend, you're not getting permission to miss classes. You're not getting permission to miss be late on homework, and so to take a couple of days off to just do the retreat, no homework, no school or anything over the weekend, it was a bit of a burden on people, and you had to sign up for it and all this and that. But I remember that the first year that that became apparent was junior year, where all of a sudden they wanted to move it somewhere completely like 45 minutes away. And then it came out that they wanted to change it so it wasn't the same retreat anymore. They didn't want to follow the same, I guess, script is basically like the same general organizational planning and the same events. They didn't want to do that anymore. They wanted to update it and modernize it because they'd been doing it for a while. And they struggled to get people to work it, and they struggled to get people to attend it. And I know from my end, as someone who had gone to the retreat freshman year and who had worked it sophomore year, that I was willing to go to bat for the original retreat. If anyone asked about it or if anyone like brought it up, I'd be like, "Oh, you should absolutely go." But then junior year, since they had changed it, I was like, "Look, I don't know what they're going to do." So I was like, I've when I went on the equivalent retreat, yeah, it was great, but I don't know what they're going to do. And so I think between this, like, nobody could really strongly vouch for it anymore, and no one was going out saying like you should go do this, because that was how it was with tech retreat. People were just not as encouraged to go, and then also those same people who were doing the encouraging to go weren't signing up in mass to go work the retreat. And so
Hmm.
was it junior year that they canceled it? Like they just outright canceled
Yeah,
it because no
they
one,
didn't have enough
yeah,
people.
right. Not enough people wanted to attend. Not enough people were willing to work it, and so it wasn't worth They couldn't afford to do the retreat.
Yeah, I
And
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was just gonna talk about like why I think retreats are successful because, like you kind of touched on it, you have an existing base of people who have went through the retreat and have been like, "Oh, I find value in this." Right?
Hmm.
I'm willing to give up a weekend of not focusing on homework, not focusing on like friends, but to go and focus on faith or help other people focus on their faith.
Hmm.
I think like when you change like the retreat, you lose that. But I would say the way that we did tech our freshman and sophomore year was amazing. Like I really enjoyed it. It was something I look forward to. Just like growing in community, having people there who want to work and help others. Just like experiencing that retreat. I think it's something that grew the community a lot. I would say it's how we met like one of our really close friends, Brett, and just like got to know him. So I would say like retreats are important for growing the community, for bringing new people into the community, and just like helping people grow in their faith.
Yeah, no, and I can definitely vouch for that because just from a personal account, like junior year, I had started dating my now wife, and she's not Catholic, and so at the time it was something that we were actively navigating, was that faith difference. And so it was, obviously at that point in our relationship, our faiths were at the widest extent, I'd say, of understanding of each other. And so, she grew up predominantly non-denominational, and so me growing up Catholic, we didn't have a full understanding of each other's worlds, and how much was different, how much was the same. And so I remember junior year when we had started dating. This had been a few months into the year by now, into the school year, and I remember thinking, okay, well, I'll invite her to go to tech, and I'll just volunteer, or maybe I'll have a track meet. Like I won't be able to attend, but I'll at least strongly advocate. Like, look, this isn't like a Catholic exclusive retreat. Like it's pretty open by my standards too. you can be of different denominations and still feel like it's built around you. It was pretty broadly Christian, I would say, and not so specifically Catholic. And so I was planning on like, hey, I think you should go to this. Hey, I think this will be worth your time. Ultimately that's up to you, but um, I would just say that I've been to it and I've worked it and I think it's great. But then, like you said, you make these changes and all of a sudden those people who can advocate for it and who are willing to work it because they know the value it had to them. Like I was like, I think I brought it up to her. I was like, hey, they're doing a retreat in a couple weeks. I was like, I was going to advocate and say, hey, I think you should go to it, but I don't really know what they're doing. Like, I don't really know what the plan is. And I don't, feel comfortable saying like, this is all this or all that. I was like, but if you're, I think I mentioned like if you're still interested, you could go, but I was like, I don't know what they're gonna do. And so, as opposed to 1 year before when we were sophomores, there were definitely some freshmen and a few sophomores that hadn't gone when they were freshmen that were like, hey, did you go on the tech retreat or whatever? I'd be like, oh yeah, it was great. Like it was so worth the time. It was worth like the extra day of like getting really caught up on homework. It was worth it, and I think you should go. But it went from that to, hey, I don't really know what they're doing. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, even our retreat, just because of COVID, it was on just our campus, and we were still like, yeah, it was awesome. Like, it was a good
Well, that
time.
was what frustrated me was that they were making it this. They were making it this thing. It was like, oh, it needs to be out in the valleys of the mountains and whatnot. And I'm like, look, I get that like you want it to be this whole experience, but and they were making it out like, oh, if it's just on campus, then no one's gonna want to do it. I was like, that's so not true. We did it. We spent the whole day in an auditorium.
Yeah.
Then we went back and slept in our own rooms, and came back and spent half of the next day in the same auditorium. Like, talk about as far as experience, like as far as the environment being as unpleasant for that kind of retreat as possible. This huge lecture hall with 200 seats and maybe 30, 50 people there, somewhere in between all of the people attending and all of the people working, and spending the whole day just in this one lecture hall. And just so for me, when I heard like, oh, people won't want to do it if it's like if they stay in their room, if they come back and stay in their rooms, like people want to be out and stay out at the retreat or whatever. I'm like, that's not the point. Like, the retreat, a good retreat will be good regardless. I understand like you want to accommodate and make it better. That is fine, but like they're at the point where financially they needed so many people to attend
Hmm.
that it was no longer about the quality of the retreat. It was just like we're trying to dress it up, and I'm like, that's not the important part of this.
I mean, we had adoration in a ballroom during our tech retreat. Like, it wasn't in this like fancy church. It wasn't.
No,
It was just like that's because that's not what it's about, right? Like,
right.
adoration
Well,
is
but the
about.
thing is, this the second year they took it out to this campground, like this
Hmm.
professionally managed business of a campground where there were lodges and bunk beds, and there was this big lodge where there was an event space, and so they did all of the talks and all of the lessons and all of the prayer time and all of the small group time, like in that area. But it was in the woods, and you could walk around and go to the field and like be on your own and whatnot. And that was great. It was definitely an upgrade from when we were in the lecture hall, just
Yeah.
sitting there all day. Don't get me wrong. But then they wanted to take another step past that while completely uprooting all of the tradition and all of the collective emotion around the original retreat itself, because they completely rewrote it. They didn't want to do the same thing. Well, like for you, I mean, because you were a weedy. I mean, were we
Yeah.
okay with
Yes. Yeah.
unveiling the secrets of the tech retreat?
I mean, I mean, it's never. I don't think it will ever be like that again.
Right. So So, you were a weedy. And for those who don't know and who've never done a tech retreat style of retreat, basically they're the people who were attending, um, and the people who were working, they went to the main area and did all the activities together. And the people who were working were, guides or just mentors or something like that. Some small group leads, stuff like that. But then there was this group of people that the other people who were working knew about and the people who had done the retreat before knew about. But the people who were attending the retreat for the first time, they didn't know that there's this group of people who was sequestered off in this other cabin, and they were following an extreme fast for the 2 days or whatever, 3 days, whatever the retreat was. And these people who were attending, they would each get, well, due to volunteer numbers, it wasn't each got a specific unique person, but sometimes, they were all assigned to a person, and that person maybe had two or three people they were writing to. And they would just do these letters and exchanges on written paper and just say like, hey, I am insert nickname, anonymous identity. I'm going to be your weedy this weekend, and just kind of somebody that you can anonymously like talk to and write questions to or elaborate on, or like say, hey, they would write like, how was the talk that James just gave? I thought it was really engaging. Do you think it had the same? What kind of impact did it have for you? You'd write out your response, and it could be as serious or as silly as you wanted it to be. It could be as deep or as light as you wanted it to be. But people would come around, collect these letters, and secretly take them off to these anonymous writers, and they would read them, write responses, and send them back. And so Ryan was one of those anonymous writers, and like that was what I think a lot of people found was a really cool experience, because they didn't know who they were writing to at the time. And by the end of the retreat, it was the big reveal who your weedy was actually there the whole time. Um, and I think a lot of people found value in it because it gave them somebody to kind of open up to, who tended to know them beforehand. It wasn't totally random, um, but it gave them somebody to just kind of open up to a little bit and speak more freely to and write it down. But they were very strongly that they wanted to get rid of that for the next year, and people were like, "That was my favorite part."
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, just
Mister Former Weedy, what were your thoughts when you heard about that?
well, Jacob was my weedy when I did it,
Yeah.
so that was a cool experience. And just like getting to interact with him without knowing that I was interacting with him in a like very just informal way where we could just discuss things is always helpful and useful because it kind of lets the guard down of like, oh, like there are social like stigmas and stuff like talking about certain things like struggles with faith. Like people
Mm.
don't just walk into a church and like or like into a faith based group and be like, I have struggled with this, I
Right.
am a sinner, like all that stuff. So just like that kind of interactions where you can talk about that stuff and just know like that you can talk about that in confidence is a great experience. And then
Right. And
also
to Oh, sorry.
the reveal of just knowing that like someone has been like fasting for you for 48 hours and like praying for you and thinking about you and like hoping that things go well for you. Like that's a cool experience too.
Yeah. Well, you did the fast. What was the fast, if you remember?
Just like water.
Just water.
Just water. Well, because like we were doing Exodus 90 during this too, and so like because they brought us Gatorade and they were like, you guys can have Gatorade too, like just like, and I was
No sweet
like,
drinks.
yeah, it was. So then you had that restriction, and then they took the water from us because they were like, we've ran out of water, so we were just like,
Not with me
please,
around.
yeah, just like give us water. That's all we wanted. So
Yeah. No, that was fun. Just trying to
it
squeeze
was
as much
definitely
water as
challenging
I could.
though.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember running because I wasn't doing the weedy and I wasn't fasting, but I was like running between the sites, delivering letters, and also like making sure you guys had what you needed. And so I would sneak out like a case of water and just be like, the Wheaties need it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, okay. So they had the retreats, and then so the community kind of lulled. Do you think that there were any symptoms of that really impacted you, with the community kind of lulling and its fervor to kind of do things together?
No, I don't think so. But that was only because like we at that point had established our own like community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we had established, oh, we're doing this, we're doing that. Like let's go to Spire tonight. Like
Mm-hmm.
let's get people together. Oh, let's go pray the rosary. Or
Mm-hmm.
like junior year when just like on Friday night we'd be like, let's go pray the stations across together and then go get food together. And it was like perfect. So I would say if that like had not happened, it would have been worse.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm
Do you,
one of the things. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask quickly, do you feel though that, so yes, we had our thing and that was good and we had a good group of people. Do you feel that you had any responsibility to pass that on, to like to connect with people who were outside of our group, to or who were younger than us in class years that were younger than us, to carry that on? Because we didn't just come up with the idea of, going to brunch every Sunday and playing games every Sunday. It was the idea of it, the general consensus of it was passed down
Mm-hmm.
from the people who graduated when we were freshmen and when we were sophomores, and we just really really did latch onto it. But do you feel that there was any, it was valuable to you, it was definitely felt valuable to me. Was there any part of you that ever felt like, well, we need to pass this on?
Yes, and I feel like there were attempts, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
because just you meet people in the community and you try to invite them to things, and they might just have different views than you on what they are looking for in community, right?
Right.
Some of the people younger than us, like a year younger than us, were like, "Oh, we've got the choir, and that's like all we need. Like that's good for us."
Mm-hmm.
Or like some people just are like, "Yeah, like going to mass on Sunday, like that is enough for me."
Mm-hmm.
Or like, "Oh, I would rather go off base for mass," and like that's enough for me. Like just inviting people to mass was what I tried to do, and just be able to understand and give people space, but try to welcome them in at the same time.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think that's fair because I definitely, it crossed my mind and weighed on me a little bit to be able to pass that on, because like I said, when I was a freshman, and we had been doing the choir for a while and we finally kind of like had been established, like the seniors and the juniors started like taking me or taking a couple of us to these group things that they were doing, like brunch. They'd go to brunch every Sunday after mass, pretty much exclusively, no questions asked. And being a part of that for even just a few months, that was something. I know that you didn't go with the same group as me, but you went with people who also did that. And
Mm-hmm.
both of us, once we had really bonded, agreed that that was a really important thing to keep going. And so they had been doing that for 2, 3, 4 years. And then when they left and graduated, we took it up and did that for 4 straight years, basically 3.5. And there was definitely a part of me that felt the responsibility to include people that would be there longer to keep it going. But at at the same time, like you said, there were attempts that were made, um, and so some people just either didn't have the same emphasis or value on that, and so they just didn't put the same effort in. Because I mean, to be fair, when we were sophomores, there were like 13, 14 people going to some of these brunches, and we'd be rolling up, and they'd be like, it's going to be an hour and a half till we get a table that suits you all. Um, and in many ways, fortunately, died down from that till we just had a consistent like 6 to 8. Um, but for those 6 to 8, it was a important thing, and so
Yeah.
that had some meaning too.
But I mean, you can't force community on someone, right?
No,
Like
no, no, no.
you can't just be like, "Hey, we have this really great thing going. You should just drop
No.
your priorities and come with us."
Well,
Um,
well, it didn't help that we had left the choir, and so I mean, these people that had passed it off to us, they were all in the choir for their 4 years, and we were done after too, and so we didn't really have the same interaction with all the newer kids to even really try. To be fair,
yeah.
um, so I was just curious if you had felt kind of any responsibility to keep that up, and maybe that's part of why we started doing this. But
Well, I would say like for me, I I would find like people would come into the area where we were at or where I was at, and I'd find out that they were Catholic, and I'd be like, "Oh, like, do you want to come to mass? Do you want to come to daily mass?" Like just that kind of stuff. Oh, here's where Spire is. Here's where the daily mass chapel is, and
mm-hmm.
that was kind of the responsibility that I felt to pass on to others, or just
Mm-hmm.
inviting them like off base to mass. Like, hey, if you're ever looking for like another place to go to mass where you might not find a lecture hall the most like perfect place to go to mass,
You
then
mean you
like
want to
there's
do a
also this
church in an
option.
actual building? No,
Yeah, preferably a beautiful one.
that's
Preferably a
true.
beautiful one.
That's true. You had something you wanted to go down a rabbit hole on. What was that?
Um, I would say just like so in college, you're presented with like challenges,
Mm-hmm.
like just all sorts of challenges, like family challenges, friend challenges, academic challenges, physical challenges, future challenges. How do you think those challenges deter people away from religion?
Yes.
And how what are the avenues that you think people bring can use them to refocus on faith? Like what does it take for people to refocus that towards faith?
I think it takes people who do have a strong security in their faith to vocalize that it's the faith isn't just a mode of avoiding difficulties. And I think the message that like, oh, Jesus is love and Jesus makes everything better, like yes, but you're missing the point. Like the point isn't that you join the faith and you suddenly everything is so easy, because it's typically not. Typically, if anything, you have more challenge because there's more burden to be carried. And so, well, how do you balance that message? And so I think that the necessary bearing of responsibility willingly is how you go about that. And so, how do I mean that? And I mean, things are going to be challenging. And so you're going to be overloaded and overwhelmed by all the stuff you have to do. And so you're going to prioritize all of that. But the idea that things get easier when you have the faith is not because God is going to take you away from challenge. If anything, he leads you more into challenge. And why would he do that? It's the same reason you go to the weight room. It's the same reason you go to the gym. It's the same reason you go run miles and miles so you can prepare for a marathon. Is because you are being called to take up your cross. And that's the message. That's one of the main messages of not just the gospel, but the whole Bible, is you are being called to take up the burden that's been given to you and bear it to make something better for the rest of the world. And so Christ, he takes up his cross, he gets beaten, he gets flogged, and he takes up his cross and he carries it up this hill and he dies. And that is, for one of the worst experiences of mankind, just in general. And so, but why? And it's because the the end goal was not the pain, but rather the enduring of the pain for the benefit of everybody else. Because at the end of that story, he dies for everybody's sins. He goes and he frees the captive souls, and he resurrects and conquers death. And so you can't get the resurrection, and you can't get the glory of the conquering of sin without the death on the cross and without the carrying of it. And so I think it's hard, right? Because people see just the pain and just the work as a bad thing and as a struggle and a burden, and it is. I mean, we're not going to downplay the struggles and burdens of life, but like I said, the goal is to take that and make it into something beautiful for other people, and that would be by, like I said, you cannot have the resurrection without the death on the cross. And so I think that people have been turned away from it because the discipline, like the the call to take up that cross has been muted. People have been told you should be focusing on what makes you happy, but not happy in the fulfilling way, happy in the pleasure, in what it gives to you, the immediate gratification of it. And I think that can be noted just by the preferences of society. And I think you can see just the trends of where people are moving. You've got all these threads of information pulling you to do what feels good in the moment and do what feels good to you now and do what you want to do in this moment. And there's a strong draw to that. But then there's also a very characteristic draw of people towards these influencers online who are saying, no, like, don't do what you want to do right now. Do what you have to do right now to get to what you want in the future, and put off put off that pleasure for something and suffer through something that makes everything that you do worth it. And so
Mhm.
you see this dichotomy, and I think the fact that there are so many people who are being pulled to that message right now shows that people are being starved of that call.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nothing to add.
I thought that was great. That was great.
Yeah, you like the monologue?
Monologue was good. I mean, yeah, just like, oh, I mean, I experienced it, right? Like, I don't want to get out of bed. It's Sunday. Like, I want to sleep in. I have physics class on Monday morning that I hate. I have to
Yeah.
wake up early for French too. Why would I get out of bed? I think for
Mm-hmm.
me, it was okay. Things are not going well in my life right now. Like, they're just not.
Mm-hmm.
And Holy Week rolls around, and Holy Week is like ingrained in me that, like, it doesn't matter what's happening. You go to Holy Week. Like, Holy Week is super important. Like,
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the most important weeks of the year for faith. And just
Yep.
kind of, I just remember Good Friday, and I was just like, dang, like, I am missing this feeling in my life. This is something that has taken a backseat, and I can no longer let it take a backseat. So,
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because every year that was the case with like every year you go to mass on Good Friday, which, bear in mind, I mean, or sorry, not mass on Good Friday, but on during Holy Week, not on Friday, obviously, but on Holy Week. And I mean, there are these days that aren't even days of obligation that people show up in huge crowds. Now I know I knew that a portion of, say, like Easter, I knew a portion of the people who were showing up to Mass would have gone to Mass. It was just the mere ease of showing up on campus, like a 5 minute walk away. So they would, normally they go off campus to go to Mass, but they came here just because it was easier. So I'm not saying that all of the people that were there normally don't, but I mean it was crazy. It'd be like a 7 times increase of the number of people who are at Mass. And like you said, I mean, it's just, there's this importance. Like you just go because that's important. Um, and it always manifests itself. It always, every time, especially for Christmas and Easter, like every time there's something special about it that no matter how far you've strayed or how dedicated you are, how far you've strayed, there's still that call for, especially for those services of Christmas and Easter, that you get called back to it. So I think it's interesting, but I think it's the thing that we forget is that it's that call is not just a feeling. Because you mentioned like I was missing this feeling in my life, and that's a very important calling and a very important feeling. But some people they feel that a couple of times they go to a church and they feel it when they show up, and then they go for a few weeks and it's like I've just got all these other things to do and I'm not. It doesn't feel the same. Blah blah blah. And you just kind of put it to the side until something extremely special like Christmas or Easter rolls around. But I don't. There's a gap that's missing in that connection between the important Sundays, the important holidays, and the regular Sundays.
I
I don't
think
know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think it's just like you have to make that connection that it's not like for me it was a feeling, right? Like it was a feeling that drew me closer. But after that it was like, well, obviously God is calling me to come partake in giving my like incoming and participating in the mass with him.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I just think I think people miss that.
Do you think that there's an aspect of grace that's connected to that? So then, a lot of people they tend to feel that feeling around Christmas and Easter when they go. And so, do you think that? I mean, you have to remember that those are extremely significant liturgical holidays, um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of power surrounding them, and continues to. Do you think that people receive, like that God grants people these graces to know that He's with them, to feel His presence with them, and that's what they feel? But then on an ordinary Sunday, after maybe they go a couple weeks, they're like, this is just like a, say it's like a New Year's resolution type of feeling, like I'm going to do this, and so they go for a couple weeks and they don't feel that feeling anymore. Do you think part of that is just him drawing back and being like, okay, I've given you the grace to know, to
Mm-hmm.
feel it, but now I'm going to, like, now you're going to walk on your own, like taking the training wheels off, like now you're, you know do it.
I could
Do you,
be wrong, but I do
yeah.
think that is like kind of what's happening.
Hmm.
Is like I was talking with a priest recently, and he was like, "You don't like you aren't obligated to go to mass. Like God doesn't make us go to mass. Like that would mean nothing. It would be nothing if we were forced to go to mass, right?
Hmm.
And by removing that kind of the special draw that these holidays have, it's God being like, okay, you know it's here now. Like you gotta make the effort.
Hmm.
So that's what I think.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because I think a lot of people do interpret like the commandments and saying like, "Thou shalt keep holy the Lord's day." Like they do interpret that as, well, God's forcing us to go. But do you think too many people read some of those, like the rule of the law, and assume it's like, "Thou shalt go because I will it," rather than interpreting it as like, no, I should be going, and these are guidelines for like things I should be doing because they are better for me.
Yes. Yeah, I think people. I mean, no one wants to be told what to do.
Right. Well, it is interesting because there's that rebellious aspect of people. Like everybody has that, regardless of how rebellious they tend to be, or regardless of how disciplined and orderly they tend to be. Like everybody struggles with that sometimes. We're just like, I mean, I saw it online just in a small meme today. It was just like, you know, the meme where it's like there's the ball and this dude's like grabbing out for the ball, but then somebody's like grabbing them and holding them back.
Yeah.
Um, so I saw that today, and the ball was me cleaning my room, or sorry, it just said cleaning my room, and then the first image where it was just like reaching for it was like me on Saturday or whatever, and then the next frame was just like my mom yelling, "When are you gonna clean your room?" And so it's people were just like, "Yeah, no, it's like they're like I was so willing to just clean my room on my own, but as soon as somebody yelled at me to do it, then I had no interest and I like, didn't want to do it, and blah blah blah." And so there's definitely something in the human nature, and I mean, that gets touched on in Genesis.
Yeah.
Like that was one of the consequences of original sin was now you have this temptation to not just simply follow it because like the stuff that your parents are asking you to do should be out of love or out of something that is going to benefit you or the family in some way. I mean, cleaning the room, just keeping things orderly in the house because that's where everybody lives. And you have to do your part to uphold the place that everybody lives. But something about it, like now, after that, there's always just a little temptation to not now, just because somebody told you to do it. And some people that's stronger. Like I'm definitely somebody that can be fired up to not just because I was told to do so.
Yeah.
And so I wonder how much of an impact that has on people, just like reading the rule of law, reading the commandments, even just the commandments, and saying like, thou shalt not kill, just because, I mean, I don't think anybody's reading them and going, well, just because you told me not to, I'm going to go out and kill. But you apply it to much smaller things like going to mass, like, oh, you have to go to mass on Sundays. It's like, no, you don't. You have a choice. But I mean, if you want a relationship with God, you probably should,
Well,
because how can you expect anything less?
just touching on what you said earlier, like doing things out of love, like your parents are like, no, like you got to do this. Like
Mm-hmm.
our blessed Lord literally died on a cross and offers us the sacrifice of his body and blood, not out of because he's like, oh, these humans must like go to
Well,
mass.
he
It's because he
asked to
loves us.
not. He asked to not. You're in the garden.
Yeah.
Father, please let this chalice pass. Oh man. Well, yeah, because it's interesting. That's a really interesting scene. It's always been a really interesting scene from the Bible for me. Just like Christ in the garden. Let me pick it. Let me pull it. What's the exact? I want the exact phrasing. If you don't, if you don't mind me pulling it up,
No, that's fine.
this would be a good chance to see if I can go into a different tab and see if it messes up with
A recording.
these. Yeah. Let me see. Matthew. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I went to the right place. I can get out of that tab. Ooh, gotta make sure I don't press the X twice and then get pulled out of our conversation. Okay, let's see. All right, so he's in the garden. He tells the apostles to remain, to the side and pray,
Which they
which
don't
on its
do.
own, which on its own is its own reflection that I tend to think about very often. The fact that he asked them to just stay off to the side and keep watch and pray, and they fell asleep and they did it again. And it's sometimes, I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to pray like a rosary while you're laying in bed and you're tired. It's hard to, it's pretty hard. And I don't know how long he is out there for, but I'd have to assume it was long enough to fall asleep. And so it's, it's no small thing to try to pray when you're tired.
Yeah,
But we can talk about that story from the Bible a
another day.
different time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so it says, so I'm in Matthew chapter 26, and it says, and going a little further, he fell upon his face, praying and saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this chalice pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And so I think that hits on the exact thing that we were just talking about of just you don't really want to, like, Christ bore this sacrifice willingly, and it's clear that he knew exactly everything that he was about to endure, and he knew how much it was going to hurt, and so he just asks, like, and it's interesting because you think about the dynamic. It's like, okay, so yeah, so Christ is asking his Father, but he's God, and God the Father is God, so he's really just kind of asking himself in a way. So that we'll never understand the Trinity fully, but that's definitely one of the interesting bits of it. But uh, let this chalice pass from me, but not that my will be done, but yours. And so I think that line, in and of itself, that is the perfect, in my head, encapsulation of what you initially asked as to why, what the challenge is, and how that's been lost on people. And I think it's because we've become so used to a society where it's no longer not that my will be done but yours, Lord, and instead it's always my will be done. And so I mean the image of Jesus in the garden praying is between the disciples and them being told to watch and pray because they're going to fall or because it'll be very important, and they just are like, yeah, we will, and then they fall asleep. And that's its own thing that we can talk about with, because I've definitely reflected on that for myself many, many times. Then there's the fact that Christ is in the garden praying that God take what he knows is clearly going to happen. He knows what's going to happen, because he's been building up to it, and he's been preparing the disciples, like, oh, you say that now because I'm here, but I will soon not be with you. And they're like, well, what do you mean? He's like, I'm not always going to be here with you. They're like, why not? He's like, you'll see. uh, so there's that, and then he's sweating blood. Like, I can't. I've been stressed many times in my life, and maybe the things that I've been stressed about aren't the most stressful thing, the most stressful things. But I mean, to be fair, this last semester of school, I was kind of against a bit of a wall. Like, I was on academic probation, basically, and so if I continued to be failing this one class, there was a chance that I didn't graduate. And on top of that, I was also under disciplinary restrictions because, of course, I just waited for the last semester of senior year to be the time when I finally just get in trouble for things. Um, and then, so I've got those two going on, and I'm preparing for the wedding. And if I don't graduate, then I can't get married, which is something like with the wedding was already something that we've put, time and money and effort into, and family were planning on coming out. Family had already like booked tickets to go and blah blah blah. And so, I was relatively stressed out about all that. And so, but at no point was I sweating blood. And because obviously that's not the same as knowing that you're going to be whipped with metal shards and spat on while you carried this hunk of a tree up a hill so that you could be nailed to it and suffocate to your death. So, slightly different situations, but mostly just to show that his situation was far worse than anything we'll find ourselves in, and so he's, please let this pass. Maybe, maybe there's another way. No. And so I think I think that perfectly ties up how we were talking about the importance of responsibility and knowing what your purpose is. And that's a lifelong thing. I mean, we're not all endowed with the knowledge of our purpose as soon as we're born. Um, but that's being tied to that and knowing what you're going through and why, even if you don't know what's going to happen next, that gives you a lot of strength. Um, I mean, one of my good friends, Oliver, he was one of the people that told me he said that hope is the strongest emotion, and that with hope people can endure anything. But if you take that away, then they're not willing to put up with anything.
Yeah.
And so Christ knew what his suffering was going to be worth. And so, no, with his eyes set on what he was about to go through, he knew that the burden and the responsibility and what it could be transformed into, which is the salvation of all mankind, was worth any price he could have had to have paid. And that is love in a way. And it's in a very important way. So I don't remember how we got here, but there you go.
Challenges, challenges, you know.
Yeah.
Do you
I don't know.
have
What are your thoughts?
um I mean, I just sometimes I think you got to understand, or you said something and I was thinking about it. Just like knowing God's will and like not wanting to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the prayers that I've just like in like my own meditations and prayer, that I've been just kind of praying is just like more of you, Lord, and less of me. Like
Mm-hmm.
more of your will and less of mine. Like just to kind of help me through
Well,
like
that's a tough battle, is like trying to combat what you want in this moment and what you think God is calling you to do, or what you know God is calling you to do.
mhm.
It's a hard battle because, well, maybe you don't really know what God's calling you to do, and so maybe you're just imagining something, but maybe you're not. Maybe you do actually know, and you're just trying to. But I really, really want to do this, and I think it's hard to reconcile the two. So how would you reconcile it? Obviously, you've got this prayer that you pray. How have you gone about reconciling things that you've been wanting to do with things that you know you ought to do?
uh I think it's just like knowing trying to I'm trying to increase what I intake more that is holy and leads me to God instead of things that lead me away from God. Like for
Mm-hmm.
example, just in college, was never in a position to be charitable. Like I mean, I was, but it was a lot harder. Like now it's easier, right? Like now it's easier to be charitable, and on top of that, I'm like trying to make sure that I am being charitable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something. That's just like a direct example.
Okay.
Like for me,
Yeah.
it's like I know that God calls us to be charitable, to look after, to be a good neighbor. So I'm like,
Okay.
how can I do that for people?
Mm. So do you think that there's a correlation for you wanting to intake and surround yourself with more holy, godly things, and how that reflects upon you doing more of what God's will is and less of yours? Do you think there's a correlation to that?
Yes, yes,
How so?
because when you're surrounding yourself with more, like one of the shows that I've been or no, I won't go there. But just like praying more. Like that's something that I'm doing. Like I'm praying
Hmm.
more than I was in college. And when I pray more, I'm like when I'm like getting frustrated, I find it easier to have patience. Or like
Right.
when I'm
That's an
like
interesting
running,
point. I want to come back to that. But yes.
uh, just praying more, I'm like, it makes it easier to do things that I wouldn't want to do, right? Like instead of filling my time with like being a part of the world, I'm filling it with just more like trying to focus and shift my attention towards God, which makes it then easier to do the things that God calls us to do instead of doing the things that the world calls us to do.
Interesting. Okay. I want to go back to that point that you made that when you're praying, you're calmer. I'm willing to go out and extrapolate this that you're more patient, um, more open to doing what you don't want to do is kind of how I'd summarize what you were saying. I think it's interesting because I just had this talk with my wife not that long ago that she was driving to go see her family, and this was actually the this was when you came to visit, um, and so she was driving. I was at the gym, and we are still developing the discipline of praying the rosary together every night as a family. Some nights we're on it, and some nights we just it falls by the wayside. And so it's been something that I've been particularly trying to reconcile. But when it was the day that you came into town, she was driving to go see her family, and so I was leaving the gym, and I was like, "Hey, make sure you pray a rosary. Maybe you should do that while you're driving before you get there." Um, and so she texted me and was like, "Yep, okay, I'll do that." And so she got back, and I was chatting with her about it, and she's like, "Yeah, it was actually really interesting. Like when you texted me, I was just about 20 or 30 minutes outside of where I was where my family is, and I was on the highway. And as soon as I started praying the rosary, I was arriving at like stop and go traffic." She's like, and I just felt so much like I had started praying the rosary and I got to the traffic, and like normally I feel not necessarily road rage but just annoyed and aggravated about it and how slow it's going and it's stopping you from getting to your family. She's like, but I had just started praying the rosary, and so I was really calm about it, and I was thinking about God, and I was praying, and obviously taking all the mental capacity it takes to drive the car. But she was like, I wasn't so upset about it. And I've definitely experienced that where if there's been times that I've prayed the rosary in the car just because I was like, I'm gonna get home late and I want to pray the rosary today, so it's either now or never. And so I prayed, and stuff like people if people cut me off, I don't get so bent out of shape by it. um, so when you said that, it definitely struck a bit of a correlation in my mind. It definitely tends to be the case that I'd say the closer your mind is, the closer that you are to God, the less that those things tend to stir you up. I don't know. Do you feel the same way about something like that?
Oh yeah, that's how I feel. Because I mean, it's it's a lot harder to be like, oh, that person just cut me off. That person is X, Y, and Z, like terrible person. When you're literally like praying to God, like
Yeah,
Lord,
yeah,
please give me patience. Like, please help me with this. And then you get cut off, and you're like, just like gotta let that one go.
yeah. Or just like it really doesn't even bother you. Like for me, I my initial reactions tend to be that way. Like not so aggressive. I try to make some kind of light out of it, but that somebody cuts me off on the highway, I'm like, you freaking goose, what are you doing? And so, but then if I'm praying or if I, had just recently prayed and I'm still in that relative state of mind, it's just like sometimes I don't even think about it. Like, oh yeah, that person's, I don't even think like that they cut me off or anything. Like it's just, oh yeah, they got in my lane. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like things are
Yeah.
good. I'm fine.
Or one of the things is just you saying that I'm like when I am like on the road and just like praying and like focusing on God, it's like, no, that person's in a rush. Like they're probably going somewhere important. Just like
Yeah.
giving them the benefit of the doubt. Like just being like,
Right.
oh, okay.
Yeah, or like you see you're passing somebody and all of a sudden someone comes up behind you and they're tailgating you, so you just they're like, okay, as soon as I'm done passing, I'll get out of the way, and they like fly by you at 20 miles per hour faster. You're just kind of like, I hope everything's okay,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, oh, freaking people suck, blah blah blah.
That guy's
I
the worst.
I don't think I have the worst road rage, but I can get stirred up.
I don't think I have the worst road rage either. It's just like I'm like, oh, it's just frustrating.
It is frustrating. It's like, why can't people just be as smart as I am?
Yeah, that's tough. I
If
don't think
everybody
anyone
would
can.
just do things the way that I want them to, if everybody would just do things the way that I want them to, then everything would be amazing. It's probably what God also thinks,
Yeah.
looking down at me when I'm just getting mad at people for driving a car. Man. Okay, so we've touched on freshman year stuff. We've touched on, let's see, the retreats. We've touched on why people may be struggling to deal with those responsibilities and those calls to live up to the responsibilities that they've been given. Were there any other questions you had written down, or
Should people get married young?
oh, oh, should people get? I mean, it's always situational, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, you and I have talked about this with regards to like children, is going from like, oh, I want this many or that many, or oh, I'm around all these people and I want to have a ton of kids because I want all of them to grow up and have good lives and whatnot. And you and I have touched on like how both of us have slowly come more and more to like, okay, well, you know what, I I just want to have as many kids as I should have, or as many kids
Mm-hmm.
as I'm supposed to have, and um, no more, no less. And I think with marriage, it's in a similar vein, and I think saying that everyone should get married young is only the Sith deal in absolutes, Ryan. Don't you know that?
I do.
Um, I don't, it's definitely not going to be like everybody should get married young. It's never going to be that way. And it's never that everybody should get married when they're older. Um, I think in order to get married and make it last and make it something meaningful and be able to have a family, because there's a difference between just like getting married because you wanted to and because like that's just what felt right, and then getting divorced 5 to 10 to 20 years later. There's a difference between that and getting married with the intent of starting a family together and making that last. And I think that there's a part of it's a maturity question, right? So are you mature enough to be able to handle not just your needs, but also somebody else's needs, and then all these little children's needs? Um, so you need to be mature enough for that. And then who knows if I'm mature enough for that? We'll find out. I think you need to be prepared. Let's say there's definitely a financial aspect of it. Um, you need to be able to you need to be able to support said family that you are trying to start. Which these days, it's definitely gotten challenging in different ways to do that. I don't think the cookie cutter format that a couple of generations ago was just like, okay, well, you go to college, you get a job that pays you 70K a year, and houses are 100K. Like, I don't think the same cookie cutter format tends to work anymore. I think that system's kind of been milked to shambles. And so you have to be set up for that. And then So there's a maturity piece, there's a readiness piece, and that encompasses finances and I think emotional capability. Like if you can't handle it yourself, then you can't handle someone else's problems too. Like, sometimes it's easier to deal with to handle other people's problems, or at least it feels like it. But if it's like the whole, and if you're in an ow, just punch the table. If you're in an airplane, don't help put somebody else's mask on, the oxygen mask on, if you haven't put yours on yet. Same goes with emotionally being ready for somebody else's. Like, don't try to help them through their problems if you can't help yourself, or if you can't, like, obviously people, you need help sometimes, but if you can't carry your own burdens in life, don't you're not ready to carry your burdens and somebody else's burdens. If you can't carry your own, then it's going to be challenging, to say the least. um, and then but then there are positives, and so people are still growing and people are still developing and you're still learning. And if you pick a good person to attach yourself to, that's going to be able to keep you in check and going to be able to call you out when you're wrong and help you get better, then and you're able to do that for them, then you are mutually helping each other develop, and you're helping each other become better people. And so, like, if you're with someone who, like, say you're out and the waiter gets your drink wrong and you just snap at them, and so you're with somebody who's like, that was super rude of you, like, you just acted like a jerk to somebody who made a simple mistake, and you're able to just see that and be like, you know what, you're right, I was wrong. That's certainly better than continuing to spend 10 years of life while you're still developing, solidifying all of these habits of yours that are not very good, because you you don't criticize yourself as well as, well, especially for guys. Guys don't criticize themselves as well as girls criticize guys. Oh man. So if if you're not with somebody who's gonna tell you when you're wrong, and you just solidify these things about you that are so bad, you're not gonna be able to. You're gonna have a harder time rewriting those. Um, and there's definitely a lot of value in, like, the youthfulness of it. So, like, part of the thing for us was, I was like, look, whether we have a baby right away or however long we wait for it. And it was like, my thing is, I've always just wanted to be married and start having children when I'm younger, like 25 and below, because I'm like, look, if I'm not going to have, when I'm 29 and have, whatever job position that I have, I'm not going to be wanting to go through my first child experience when I have less energy. And I was like, let's take it to the extremes. Like, I don't want to be 40 going through my first, baby crying all night episode. Like, I'm not going to have the energy for that. I'd rather do that when I'm, 20, just for extremes.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
there's definitely some more aspect to, like, to be having the energy to learn and having the time to learn and adapt. Because people for us, they would, so many people were like, oh, you're gonna graduate, you're gonna go have a job, but you're not gonna have that much responsibility. So right after college is like the best time to go get your master's, because you're not you don't have you have all this time, you don't have so much responsibility, you don't have a family, you don't have kids at home that you have to take care of, so that's the best time, blah blah blah. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, well, if by that logic, like, I have the least amount going on at work, that's the best time to be taking care of a child at home, if I have the least responsibilities at work. So there's positives and negatives, but I think by and large, so many people are taught these days that you have to focus on yourself and focus on your career and focus on this and that, and focus on money, that the emotional maturity, the mental maturity, and the overall desire to, like, the willingness to think about and start a family. So, like, you have to want to start a family if you're going to get married. So I think so little emphasis and value is put on it now that it's like for a lot of people right now, I would say, yeah, no, you should wait because you're not ready for it. You haven't spent enough time preparing yourself. Like ultimately, it's a matter of preparing yourself. It's not like you're going to find someone out there and change them to be the perfect person for you to marry, and then it's time for you to get married. It's no, you're going to become a person that someone is able to put up with being around 24/7, and you're going to become somebody that somebody else wants to be around, not the other way around. And so no, I don't think right now a lot of people are ready for that. And but I do think that there would be a lot of value in people thinking about it that way and thinking about it like, oh, if maybe I do want to have a family and I do want to have somebody who's going to help me become a better person, and I do want little children running around I want to be able to play with them and teach them things and go do this and that and whatnot, and I want to have the energy to do all that. Like then you can start thinking, okay, well now who do I have to become? Well, you need to become somebody that somebody else wants to be with and do all those things with. And so in from that sense, yes, I think people should consider it because then you start thinking about the world in a way of how can I become a better person to be ready for all that rather than just like thinking about yourself. So yes and no, but largely yes. In a roundabout way to answer your question.
That was good. That was good. Do you have
Yeah.
any?
Do you
Do
feel
you have any?
do you feel prepared to be married?
No, no, I do not feel prepared to be married. I think that's
Good. You
that's the
should never
easy.
feel fully prepared.
Well, yeah, like I mean, I don't think I'll ever be fully prepared. I don't ever plan on getting engaged to someone and then waiting 12 years to get married, or like dating someone for 12 years though, because I
No.
understand like that there's never a perfect time. So,
No. I mean, there's definitely a lot of value in saying, you know, there's still some rough ends that we need to work on, but I'm not gonna give up on you, and you're not like as long as you're not willing to give up on me and solidifying that in a promise to always be faithful to that. Now you should do plenty of work on yourself to make sure that you can actually uphold a promise like that. And you should do your due diligence to make sure that the person you're promising that to is somebody who can uphold their end, and that's the purpose of dating. But I mean, I think of course, there's never going to be a perfect time, and if there is, then chances are it's really not.
yeah.
And so, if everything was if everything was set perfect, and then you could promise that you're going to stay with somebody no matter what, and you promise to stay with them because now all these things are lined up and they're great, then that is just as good. That's just as good as saying that you'll stick around even when like when you have no. So it's not an empty promise to say that you'll stick around when things are going well, but it's I'd say less resounding than if things were kind of like, oh well, if we still, it's not the perfect time, and we're still trying to sort out school and jobs, but we're going to do it together. Like there's definitely more strength in that bond when it's maybe not when it's made while everything's falling apart, but when you've got something but you don't have everything. We could probably pull on that thread a little longer with more thought on it, but I don't know.
Do you have any parting thoughts for today?
Parting thoughts.
Hmm.
I've always got thoughts, Ryan. I don't know. Do you?
I think just kind of wrapping things up. Community is important. Building community is something that takes work, especially or and that also applies to relationships towards marriage.
Yes.
And Yeah, like God gives us challenges for reasons.
Yeah.
And it's on us to accept those challenges and grow from them because we can very easily turn away from them.
Well, and they're not for such unknown reasons all the time. I think that was one thing that I meant to kind of pull on when you had talked about that you wanted to, or that you have been spending more time praying, and you've spent more time praying, saying like more of your will and less of mine, is that part of the reason that Christ could endure his suffering, knowing all how awful it was going to be, is because he knew what the suffering was going to or to bring about. And so we had talked about like it's easier to embrace suffering when you take it up willingly to make it into something meaningful and useful for everybody else. And so when you were talking about that, it made me, I was thinking about what you were saying and, well, how do you know what God is calling you to? How do you, how do you reason with what is God calling me to do and why? Like the why of what he's doing. And so, well, I think that you were starting to hit the nail on the head with it, and that's you can't know what God is asking of you and why He's asking it of you if you don't spend time getting closer to Him. And so, the more time that you spend with God, and the more the time that you spend talking to Him, the closer you get to know Him. Like He knows you perfectly well, but you don't know God very well. I certainly don't. But in the grand scheme of knowing people, um, like you still have a lot. That's how you make close friendships, right? Is you spend time with them. You spend time with that person. You spend time doing things with them. You spend time chatting with them and having deep conversations with them and getting to know them. And then through that process, you create a deeper bond with that person, and you care about that person. And so the same goes with God. And we're relational creatures in the sense that we need to be social and we need to form those bonds with people. And so the same bond needs to be formed with God. And so the more time that you spend fostering that relationship and the more time that you develop it, then the better that you will know God and the better you will know what he's asking of you and why. So you won't need to, like, I think to the message of you need to just trust God and he's going to give you burdens and you just need to carry it sometimes comes off as it's too much of a blind trust for people to accept. People are like, well, I don't know what he's asking me to do and it's hard, so why would I don't know what it's for, so why would I do it? And my thought on that is that you need to develop a close relationship with God in order to know who he is, what his intentions are, and why he'd ask you to do certain things. And so the closer that you get to him, the more you know those things, and the more willing you are to endure whatever he's asking you to. And so, and it's interesting because you said the prayer is, more of your will and less of mine. And it's interesting because the closer of a relationship you have with God, it seems to me, the more that you desire the better you'd foster that relationship, the more you desire the same things as him, the more you seek to bring those things about. And so then the more your will and his will come together. And so it becomes you want the same thing as him. And so the whole more of your will and less of mine turns into my will is aligned with yours so well that everything that I do and everything, like the extreme version of that would be if you've lined up, if you've spent so much time with God and you've come to understand him and you trust in him, then you can make it so that everything that you desire and your will, everything you want to do is perfectly lined up with his and that they just fit together. And so everything that you do, you don't have to question it. You just do it, and it is the same. It does you. You're doing what God is asking you to do. You know.
Yeah. That's kind of the point of that prayer.
Yeah.
It's like just trying to align my will with his.
Right, right, right. So it's not so much that you're taking the decision process like you it's not about you asking to take the decision process out of your hands. Like you're not ask it's not a that prayer's not necessarily saying like you make all the decisions and I'll just be a part of it. It's more like help me become so like you that everything that I want is the same as what you want. And so it's just become how I operate is like you.
Exactly. Nail on the head there.
Ding. Oh man. So yeah, I think that's a good point to conclude on for today.
I agree. I agree.
One of these times I'll have to convince you to do your impressions.
Impressions, yeah.
Yeah, on the podcast.
The pod. We had 1,000 subs. I'll do them.
Oh, I know that your impressions they can be more than bought and paid for.
Ah, yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for watching, John. Thanks for. Oh,
Oh, yep.
uh,
All right.
what? All right, what?
No, no, you were on to an outro. I was ready to hear the rest of it.
Oh, thank you guys so much for watching, John. Thank you for your time. This has been great, and yeah, we'll see you in the next one.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.